Um, I'm recently married. I got married in the pandemic in our backyard in October to Mary Rose Go, who I'm madly in love with. And I wrote this poem. This is from Brooklyn Antediluvian. Brooklyn Antediluvian. I wrote um, after a breakup. So there's a sort of this flood of feeling that's in that book, and a flood of healing, I guess, too. So I just want to thank Glenn and all the folks at Cornell and all you all, and I wish you all the best with your writing this term. Um, my last poem, Ode to Eating a Pomegranate in Brooklyn. When I fall in love again, I will have another heart and a second set of eyes, which is one way to watch the woman you love grow old. The story of my heartbreak started like this. Someone gave me a key that opens many doors. I traded it for a key that opens only one. I traded that one for another, and that for another, until there were no more doors, and I had a fistful of keys. At any given moment, only part of the world is gruesome. There are 3 pomegranates in the fridge waiting to be broken open. When I fall in love again, my beloved and I will spit seeds into the street until the birds come to pluck them. When I fall in love, I'll count the tick of little pits in city puddles. I'll forget the dead and count the doors instead. Thank you very, very much.
Wow. Oh, thank you, Patrick. That was amazing. It was really amazing.
My pleasure, Glenn.
You know, we've had so many good readings, and there's been lots of comments about how strange it is to be in your position and not get the sort of immediate feedback that you would from a crowd. And I was sitting here thinking there's lots of stuff going on in the chat, but what I thought was like, I want to see the audience and look people in the eyes and say, you heard that, right? I mean, that was just, you heard that, right? It really was something. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I know we have, so if people don't know, Patrick and Curtis Bauer are going to be in conversation in the morning where we can have some conversation and see each other. But I think we have, time for some conversation. Yes, Patrick, this evening?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, because there's a question here. Heather asked about your last lines. She says your last lines are epic and feel very intentional. How do you work through crafting the perfect last line, leaving your readers with their jaw dropped? Yeah, tell us how you do that, Patrick.
I don't know. That's not an effect that I'm going for. I can say something about. I mean, one of the things that I've heard before is that, is to put your best line last. There's a way that kind of like lifts the poem. And it's neat. I think that's a sort of neat strategy. But one of the things that I do, and rather than strategies, I just want to talk a little bit about process, which is that oftentimes in composition and revision, I arrive at a place that feels like an ending, and I just don't settle for that. I think one of the reasons why my poems are so long is that when something feels like an ending, I ask another question, because sometimes the click or that good feeling or that feeling of resolution in a poem is actually fear, and that that line that's signaling a resolution is telling you to stop. And so what I have to do is, and that little stop is like a door, and what I have to do is open that door and walk into the room to find out what's there. Sometimes there's nothing there, and certainly that's the last line. But more often than not, that feeling like, oh, I did it, I got it. It's really just, it's just a place for me to stop for a little while before the poem wants to move on and say, no, 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 no. There's something else. There's another world that's attached to this thing. So there's that. That doesn't say anything about last lines, except that it's just good craft. It's just like I'm following the music so that the music can argue with my own willfulness, so that my willfulness is not guiding the poem. And the music leads me towards things that I can't or don't want to say. And those last lines are often the things that I'm like, that is not the thing that I had expected to say. That is not what I felt or thought or believed when I first started the poem, or halfway through the poem, or 3 lines ago. And then the last thing that I'll say, I mean, this is all just like craft stuff, right? That, you know, that sometimes the force of the last line is not the last line. It's the way, it's the way that the poem evolves into it. And so sometimes this a last line that feels like that doesn't feel right. Sometimes it's the thing above it, or the 3 or 4 things that are above it that you have to sort of play with and question and rework. So that's a really long answer because it's like a mystery, and and the last line is so connected to everything else in the poem that it's really about writing the whole poem. I just realized that I said something that's probably not very, but I hope it's helpful some ways.
No, I thought, you know, there was so much in that answer, actually. That was great. Yeah, and there's another question here that actually builds on a comment that I wanted to make, which is that one of the things, among many, one of the things that I love about your work is, you know, there's that very false divide between performance and page. You know, people make that distinction, but it's a false divide. But your work really, really shows that. I mean, it's dynamic, a dynamic performance. It works so well the way you present it, but it also, you know, I love to read those poems on the page just as much. But so there's a question here about whether if you've always been such an incredible live reader, and if not, how did you learn to perform like that?
My first training was as a musician and as a dancer, and I don't even mean formal training. I'm a self-taught musician, and I was a b-boy growing up. And you know, you think an MFA program is pressure. You know, try dancing in a b-boy cipher, or try DJing in front of a crowd that wants to dance until 6 o'clock in the morning. Like, you know, that ongoing conversation with listeners. I think that one of the things that musicians and dancers, well, musicians specifically, know that writers sort of have to kind of work towards is that when you're listening to a musician, you're not listening to somebody playing an instrument. You're listening to somebody listening to an instrument. And so when you're reading a text, you're not reading somebody who's writing something. You're reading something from somebody who's reading the world. Right, and so and who's listening to the world, and so there are all these parallels in different art making things, and it's actually pretty straightforward if you've ever immersed yourself in any kind of art making before. Those processes are immediately translatable into what you do on the page. And I think one of the sort of like one of the lamentations that I have about the way that we think about books and literature, especially in the US, is that it's like all up here, or it's like about ideas, or it's about gimmicks, or tricks or intellect or thinking. I love beautiful and deep thinking, but it makes the body absent. And so reading your work aloud, whether it's prose or poetry, is deeply important. That's already the beginning of performance. Second of all, the idea of performance as being like, you know, you're a performer only if you perform on stage. The moment that you go and grab your coffee down at the block, well, I don't know if people are doing that in the pandemic now, but like, you know, in your encounter with strangers, you're already improvising a kind of interaction. That is a performance. And to understand the spontaneity, the energy, the questioning, the kind of reading that you're doing in that moment is already a kind of performance. And it's just a matter of channeling what is already natural to us in this sort of like performance and writing thing. You know, so I think I've had an advantage in that, you know, I've been around music and musicians my whole life. I've been around a lot of dancers and other kinds of performers. And I think the other element that I don't talk about a lot, but was certainly important, is that my father was actually a Catholic priest. And he was a theologian, but when he was still in the church, he was a tremendous deliverer of sermons. And my father continued to give talks and speeches. So I had a rhetorical model. I had several rhetorical models when I was growing up. My dad, and the kitchen table with my aunts and uncles talking shit, and my brother's an amazing storyteller. So all of those things sort of go into it. I want to say this too. It's not particular to me. Each one of you has a rhetorical out loud vocabulary from the people who are around you, your family, your friends, your cousins, and that's your performance vocabulary. That's your writing vocabulary. That is your sonic palette right there. And so I wasn't necessarily anointed or blessed. I just listened to the shit that was around me.
We do all have that. Some of us are more dynamic and charismatic than others, and you are certainly one. I wonder, I mean, I know you read out loud as you write and revise, but do you write toward performance? I mean, or is when you're reading these, is it, you refer to improvisation. I mean, are you doing that based on a text that wasn't necessarily written? What's your relationship as you revise it toward how you think you'll perform it?
Yeah, I think it's just my ear. I think it's just, it's such a blurred line, and in some ways when I'm composing and revising, I'm bringing people into the room. Some people I'm kicking out of the room. But even if I'm alone, I'm sort of imagining people with me, people who are beloved to me, because in that sort of interaction, in that mutual presence, there's a kind of economy of language that happens in a way that does not happen if I am thinking of someone abstractly, if that makes sense. So I'm writing toward performance in that all writing is writing towards performance in that very sort of like specific vector of language and feeling. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah. As I said, we'll be able to continue this conversation in the morning. Is there maybe one more question or comment out there anyone wants to ask? Seeing anything? Well, Patrick, I'll just repeat, that was stunning, and I thank you so much for sharing that with us.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do it. So thanks.
Great. Well, and thanks for everyone in the audience for joining us. Hope to see you in the morning, and we'll see you tomorrow, Patrick.
Right on, Glenn. Take care.
All right.